Ireland and Mexico are now jointly urging the Security Council to place the utmost priority on protecting and vindicating the rights of Afghan women and girls in all decisions and action on Afghanistan's future. We have written today to the Council indicating 4 immediate actions we believe the Council needs to take now. The Security Council must unite and express clearly its rejection of these assaults on the rights of women and girls. The Council must, as a matter of urgency, call on all parties to respect and facilitate the emergency evacuation and safe and timely departure of Afghans, including human rights defenders, women leaders, and those involved in public life, women's rights activists, peace builders, and journalists who wish to leave the country. The Council must continue to demand full, safe, and unimpeded humanitarian access. This must include access for women humanitarians and frontline workers throughout the country to carry out their life-saving work. The Security Council must insist with all Afghan parties that the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in any new government is a non-negotiable condition of international engagement. We've all heard the purported assurances from the Taliban that the rights of women and girls will be respected. What we hear from women on the ground does not bear this out. The past record of the Taliban does not bear this out. The Security Council must listen to Afghan women and it must heed them. Now is the time for the Council to stand with the women and girls of Afghanistan.
Good afternoon to all of you. Mexico and Ireland are extremely concerned by the impact of the crisis in Afghanistan on women and girls. It is deeply disturbing for us to see how their hard-won rights and progress made over the past decades are being stripped away after the Taliban's takeover. Violence has compounded existing crises of international displacement, drought, and COVID-19. Hundreds of thousands of women and girls have been displaced and are facing extreme vulnerability, undermining their health, their dignity, security, and autonomy. Taliban violence has targeted women and girls. We have heard repeated and credible reports of summary executions, beatings, sexual and gender-based violence, sexual slavery, and forced marriage. We have heard of restrictions placed on women and girls seeking to access healthcare facilities or go to school or work, and of restrictions to their freedom of movement without a male guardian. We are concerned as well that no women have been included in the negotiations towards a future government and political settlement. Any future government of Afghanistan must be representative of all its people, including and in particular its 18 million women. Girls must be free to go to school, women must be free to participate fully in society, and those who speak up for their human rights must be free to do so without fear or without reprisals. Let us be clear, the rights of women and girls need to be at the heart of our collective and united response to this crisis. This is not a peripheral issue, this is at the core of the task facing the Security Council on Afghanistan. We thank you.
We might just have time for a couple of questions then. James, do you want to start?
James Bays, Al Jazeera. Could you tell us a little bit more, you've been in touch with the UN in Kabul, about the sort of reports you're getting? Because I understand for the UN, we've seen lots of reports on social media, but for the UN, it must be quite hard for them to verify them at this stage because the UN is finding it rather hard to get out of its compounds and carry out its work. And a second question, if I may, in terms of a mechanism for people to leave the country who feel under threat, women who feel under threat, it doesn't look like the NATO US presence will be there at Kabul airport for much longer. How urgently can you set up a mechanism for for women who want to leave?
Well, first of all, I must say that the briefing we had this morning from the UN was extremely bleak and dark for Afghan women in particular. The reality that they are facing on the ground isn't being borne out by the assurances we're hearing. We're really, really concerned, to go to your point about the specifics, James, about the situation at the airport. We think it's already a difficult situation, and particularly for women and access to the airport, but we think there's a real risk of an even more catastrophic situation developing there. We know that there is panic and fear that's widespread, particularly amongst Afghan women. We're very concerned about the safety of women who have actually spoken out in recent days for their own rights, and who have been traditionally visible and vocal in public life, and also for women journalists, for women peace builders, public servants. So there is a huge issue around access to the airport, about the safety of women in Kabul and on the way to the airport. When you ask about the exits and how that will work, what we have certainly, I know in Ireland and Mexico, we ourselves have been offering humanitarian visas, prioritising women, in Ireland certainly, prioritising women and human rights defenders. We want to make sure also that foreign nationals who wish to leave the country can get access to the airport, but also those with visas are unimpeded in that access. On the question of what happens next, we have called today in our letter to the President of the Security Council for greater cooperation and coordination amongst international partners to ensure that whether it's Afghans or foreign nationals, those who wish to leave the country, and because we're speaking about women in particular, I'll emphasize again, women who want to leave the country, women and girls, that they can do that safely. And we believe there's a need for better cooperation and coordination, and we specifically address that issue in our message to the President of the Council.
Maybe Michelle, go ahead.
Thank you, Ambassador. Michelle Nicholas from Reuters. Sorry, just to follow up again, you mentioned that you heard some fairly bleak, dark stories this morning. Is there any particular story that might stand out to you from what you've heard this morning that you could share with us? And we just heard from the Secretary General that he told the Security Council that effectively the only leverage that anyone has over the Taliban is legitimacy, and it's important that the Security Council remain united to achieve an inclusive government, human rights, and in particular respect for women. Are you confident that the international community and the Security Council will stay united, particularly on women's rights?
Well, confidence is one thing. We will certainly be working to ensure that women's rights and girls' rights, which to date have been a uniting factor around the table of the Security Council, that stays front and centre. For us, it's, as I said earlier, it's non-negotiable. This isn't a nice to have. Women's fundamental rights, their freedom to movement, their freedom to healthcare, reproductive rights, their freedom to education, fundamental human rights issues for us. Afghanistan is a member of the UN, has all of the obligations that membership brings with it. So respecting those rights is for us part of respecting your membership of the UN. In terms of the stories specifically, I have to say, you could not pick out one story that tells you what the bleak situation is. When I spoke in the council a couple of days ago, I said we are talking to the women who are afraid to leave their homes to go on the streets. There are hundreds of thousands of those women. If you see any media coverage of Kabul in the last few days, women are decidedly absent from any visuals. We're also talking to women who are stuck on the road to the airport with children. We've seen horrific scenes. We have credible reports of sexual and gender-based violence being committed against women, not just in Kabul, but across Afghanistan. This all has to stop. And this is linked very much to the question of the legitimacy of any government. For me, inclusivity means respecting the rights of women and girls. There's no inclusivity that doesn't do that, and that's part of legitimacy as far as we're concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Talk to you soon.